After a Southern victory at the Battle of Chancellorsville, Confederate General Robert E. Lee marched his troops north into Pennsylvania. The hope was that another Confederate victory, this time on Northern soil, would force the North, or the Union, to recognize Southern independence and ultimately render the United States into two separate countries. The next big battle would ultimately decide the fate of the Civil War. The Northern and Southern armies met at a small town called Gettysburg, where many important roads came together. For 3 long days, soldiers on both sides fought an important fight with bravery and honor. Finally, after much bloodshed, the Union was able to declare a victory. In the end, an estimated 51,000 soldiers were considered casualties of war. Each one of these men was an American, and it was a terrible tragedy for our nation. Several months later, a national cemetery was created on the battlefield to bury many of the soldiers who died at Gettysburg. At its dedication ceremony, the main speaker was Edward Everett, and he spoke for 2 long hours. When President Abraham Lincoln was asked to make a few closing remarks, he spoke only 272 words in a little over 2 minutes. Although his speech was much shorter, the words he chose reminded us that we were a nation created for freedom and liberty. He also encouraged people, weary of war, to continue the fight to save our country. As part of an integral Civil War unit, the 6th graders at Covenant Christian School were challenged to memorize Lincoln's words in the Gettysburg Address. In many ways, this is one of the most important speeches in American history, as it reaffirms the principles that our country was founded on and reminds us of the sacrifice of the veterans who served to defend our freedom.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Now we are engaged in the great Civil War, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war.
We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this.
But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground.
The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract.
The world will little no longer remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.
It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced.
It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us.
That from these on our dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion.
That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom,
and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.